So welcome. In today's video, I'm going to work on more of a simple project, and I have some plywood and I'm going to turn it into a whole mess of magazine file holders. Okay, so this is what we'll be making today. I made this one about, 10 years ago or so. It's made out of foam core and it's seen better days, so I figured this is a good time to make some more sturdy ones out of plywood. So first things first, I need to go ahead and grab a few measurements off that so I know what they should be, and go ahead and screenshot this if you want to make your own. Also important to note, if you want to make these so they will hold a fine woodworking magazine, you got to make that 9-inch dimension 9.5. But for popular woodworking, most other magazines, comics, something like that, you can make it at 9. So this is just showing basically a top-down view of what the front and the back will look like. We're going to go ahead and cut some rabbets on that, and then a side view for the side panels. All right, so first thing we need to do is start chopping up some plywood, and this is what is going to end up being the front, the back, and the bottom. Those are all the same dimensions. So I'm just going to go ahead and zip all of that off on the table saw. And just in case it wasn't clear, the stock that we are starting with is 1/4-inch Baltic birch plywood, and it's 30 by 30 is what these sheets came as. If you have the ability, you can get them up to 5 foot by 5 foot. So after everything is ripped, then it's time to start cross-cutting. And there's a lot of repetitive movement in all of this, so be careful. That's when you can start losing fingers on the table saw. And the one thing to try to do here is cut all of the same dimensions at once. It just makes things a lot easier. Then you don't have to go back and redo stuff. And so now it's time to cut those rabbets I originally showed you. Here's that picture again. And I set my fence to 4 5/16 of an inch. And what that's going to allow me to do is make sure I get the inner dimension that's between those two rabbets to be 4 inches. And so basically all I'm doing is I cut one, spin the piece 180 degrees, and then cut the rabbet on the other side. And I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of the fronts that I cut out and all of the backs that I cut out. And so this is what that looks like after the first pass. And now I need to move the fence over slightly so I can start cutting out the rest of that waste. If your table saw can use a dado blade, this would be the time to do that. But this one, it doesn't do that, and it's just as easy to just kind of move my fence over, make a couple extra passes. Doing it this way left just a little bit of junk at the bottom of those rabbets, so I just went ahead and grabbed a router plane, and I'm just kind of leveling out the bottom of that joint. You don't necessarily need to do this. You could do this with a chisel. You could probably do it with a powered router and an appropriate bit. Or just take a little more care on the table saw. Honestly, this wasn't too bad, and I had the tool, so I went ahead and used it. All right, so now I need to cut the angle at the front. It just makes getting those magazines in and out a lot easier. This was about 45 degrees, and I could have done this in a couple different ways. I went ahead and just set up the miter gauge to do this. If I was going to be making a lot of those, this could be a good opportunity to make a jig for a cross-cut sled. So now it's time to start gluing everything together. And this is kind of an awkward glue up just because there's not necessarily, the back's higher than the front, so it makes it a little difficult. But I've got some corner blocks essentially that help hold everything in orientation so I can clamp it down. And cutting those rabbets allow the front and the back to register against the sides. Makes it a lot easier to keep everything square. I'm going to show you a few different methods of trimming up the excess material. So the way that I cut these was purposefully to leave excess along the sides, just make it easier for myself, trying to get everything lined up without the use of like finger joints, for example. So the first up is a router and a pattern bit. Fairly straightforward. My preferred way is actually using a block plane like you see here. You can use hand tools with plywood. The one thing you do want to do is kind of come in from both directions so you don't rip out some of those internal plies. And then, you know, if you don't have either of those, a chisel will always work as well. A little bit slower, just paring off that excess material. And you can also use boutique tools if you happen to know anybody that sells them and make them like I do. Anyway, this is really just a shameless self-promotion. And then finally, the last one, you know what, we're just going to sand that bottom. I'll make sure that entire bottom edge is nice and flush, and the easiest way really to do that for this, I figured, was some sandpaper attached to the table saw bed, nice and flat, makes it pretty simple. And now it's time to glue the bottom on, and, you know, just some more glue, and we'll just spread that all around. And the bottoms, are oversized compared to the box, makes it pretty easy. And then I'm using my bench essentially as a big clamp as well. And I let those sit for, you know, overnight, and then trim off the excess there just with a saw. And I'm going to come back now and just, you know, again, trim it with the router and a pattern bit. And at this point, I had a couple spots that there's a little bit of some gaps here and there, and I'm going to just fill those in with some putty. Now, putty is never going to look flawless. Like, you know, it's always never going to quite match, but I figured that that putty would match better than having a little bit of like a black line where the joint has a little gap in it. Now, that top section there, I'm just using a block plane to kind of level that out. And then we're going to go ahead and sand it up just to get rid of all of the excess putty. And my sander caught the corner there, ripped a chunk off, but I was managed to save it, to find that little piece, and then glue it back in. So just a little super glue and some patience. And then one last quick sanding, breaking the corners. Just slightly finer grit, and then it's all done. No finish applied. Doesn't need it. Not too worried about it. And all of my magazines are, you know, stored. If you're curious on price, based on the cost of the plywood, a 30 by 30 sheet was like $20. It works out to be, each one of these was cheaper than the plastic ones on Amazon, but more expensive than the cardboard ones. And on a 30 by 30 sheet, I could get about 3 out of it. And I think for a full 5 by 5, you get 12. So at any rate, thank you so much for following along, and I will catch you on the next one.